Panel 2, the good, the bad, and the ugly, empowering patients to implement research evidence. So it's a good follow-through on the conversation that we just had. Last but not least, we have Allison Zieve, who is the Director of Public Citizen Litigation Group and General Counsel for Public Citizen. A resource that I have used many times. Go ahead, Allison.
Hi. I was not asked to talk about guidelines. The title of my talk is supposed to be Basing Regulation of Commercial Speech About Pharmaceuticals on Scientific Evidence, so I just want to start by revising that to Basing Regulation of Pharmaceuticals on Scientific Evidence, and I'll explain why in a minute. Again, I'm Allison Zieve. Public Citizen is a consumer advocacy organization started in 1971. One of the original parts of Public Citizen was the Health Research Group, run for a very long time by Dr. Sidney Wolfe. The Health Research Group, or HRG as we call it, is basically an FDA HHS watchdog. And because of that, the litigation group where I work does a fair amount of work related to FDA-regulated products and FDA regulation. So that's how I got into this topic that we're going to talk about. So at least since the 1990s, pharmaceutical companies have been pushing back against FDA restrictions on promoting products, promoting primarily drugs, for uses that they have never been approved for. And after only small initial success, the movement has picked up in recent years, with the industry filing lawsuits and getting advocates in Congress to introduce bills that would allow industry promotion of drugs for unapproved uses. And the theory on which they're pressing their effort is that restricting off-label promotion violates the First Amendment. The effort in my view and in the FDA's view, and I have to say we disagree with the FDA probably 60% of the time, but we're fully on board here and actually worried that they're preparing to back off. But the industry effort threatens the regulatory process for ensuring that prescription drugs are safe and effective. And it poses a danger, I think a real danger, that we could return to the days of the late 19th century and early 20th century snake oil salesmen touting products as drugs for uses that have never been proven safe or effective. So to discuss these arguments, I think it's helpful to start with a brief history, how the FDA approves drugs and how we got here. The current scheme developed in response to real-world situations that highlighted the need for an objective decision maker to assess safety and effectiveness before drugs reach the market. The same is true for medical devices, but we're going to talk about drugs. So Congress took the first step in 1906. It passed the Pure Food and Drugs Act, in part in response to cure-all claims for worthless and often dangerous medicines. The law prohibited the sale of misbranded or adulterated drugs, but it didn't require any pre-market approval. And before the government could force a drug off the market, the government had to bear the burden of proving that the product's labeling was false or misleading. Then in 1937, the law took the next step. It followed the death of 105 people from taking what was called elixir of sulfanilamide, which was a liquid form of an early antibiotic. That product was actually tested in studies and initially marketed in tablet and capsule form. It wasn't tested in liquid form, but it was sold in liquid form about 8 months after the pill went on the market. And it included a toxic chemical in the liquid form. So then people died. This incident prompted passage of the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which required manufacturers to submit pre-market notifications demonstrating to the agency the safety of each new drug. In 1962, we had a near miss, that is a non-disaster, at least not in the United States, that prompted another expansion of FDA authority. The FDA refused to approve thalidomide, which was marketed in Western Europe and elsewhere for insomnia and morning sickness and some other uses, and it caused severe birth defects in 10,000 newborns. The fact that the FDA refused to approve the product brought new attention to the approval process, and Congress then strengthened that process to require not only a showing of safety but also of effectiveness before a product could come on the market. The requirement of adequate and well-controlled studies that was implemented at that time was deemed revolutionary at that time and invaluable in advancing drug safety. So through the 38 in particular and 62 laws, Congress protected patients by mandating a pre-market review that allows the FDA to detect unsafe or ineffective medicines before they reach patients. And the resulting approval process is a cornerstone of modern health and safety regulation. But when we talk about approved drugs, it's true the FDA approves a drug for marketing. The product cannot come on the market without FDA approval. But what the FDA is more specifically approving is the marketing of a drug for a particular use. The drug isn't just approved, go at it. So the approval of the product's labeling is part and parcel of the FDA review process. So after a drug is approved for one use, the government and the public maintain a strong interest in evaluating its safety and effectiveness for any additional uses that were not part of that initial approval. Because a drug that is worth where the risk-benefit calculation works for one condition might not be true for another. For example, a product that has some harmful side effects but is worthwhile to try in a cancer patient might not make sense for someone suffering from migraines. So the FDA doesn't evaluate in a vacuum. It weighs the risks and benefits, and that may be different for each use. So manufacturers' assurances, as we've learned for more than a century, of safety and effectiveness, they're no substitute for FDA's evaluation of the evidence. We have extensive evidence showing that companies exploit marketing techniques to mislead doctors about safety and effectiveness of unapproved uses. For example, when selecting educational material to send to doctors, the companies, quite understandably, send the positive articles and would not be distributing the negative ones. And as a result, what gets played up is the good stuff, the potential of a drug, but what gets played down and not shared is information about side effects and adverse reactions and serious warnings. Companies sometimes present doctors with preliminary studies with small sample sizes that reflect favorably on a particular new use while not sharing results from negative studies. And doctors are thus led to believe that a certain drug is safe and effective for an additional use because they've seen one article when in fact there's considerable uncertainty. So these marketing techniques are particularly pernicious because the drug companies overwhelmingly fund the drug studies. And the studies funded by the companies generally yield more favorable results than other studies. The inherent bias, though, can be hidden by using of ghostwriters or academics to pose as authors. Merck, for example, funded a study of Vioxx that was designed to appear to test safety, or publicized as though it was supposed to be a safety test, but it actually had been designed by its marketing department. I'm going to keep moving along. So allowing the broad marketing of drugs for unapproved uses that the industry seeks would also, I think, deter clinical trials for additional uses, because the manufacturers aren't going to invest the substantial time and money to test new uses and go through a supplemental approval process for those uses if they can just tout the products to patients and doctors without FDA approval. So what's the legal debate? Well, although marketing for an unapproved use, that is selling a product, introducing it into commerce for a use that is not approved by FDA, that's unlawful, and that is not disputed. The debate today is not so much about the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act requirements, but about the First Amendment. The industry claims that the restrictions on off-label promotion violate its First Amendment right, because the Supreme Court has held that companies have First Amendment rights, and they say their statements are true. In the terminology of the legal world, of court decisions, the industry promotional speech, advertising, detailing, it's commercial speech, which means speech that proposes a commercial transaction or is intended to encourage sale of a product. In the Supreme Court cases, considering the extent to which the First Amendment can restrict commercial speech is the focus of the debate in the courts and of the agency's advocacy, I'll call it, to the FDA. So commercial speech that's false and misleading can be banned, period. And commercial speech that is truthful and not misleading can be restricted only if it's tailored to directly advance a substantial government interest. The FDA points out that promoting for an unapproved use is unlawful, and that promoting for an unapproved use is evidence that the manufacturer intends to sell for an unapproved use, which renders the labeling inadequate because the labeling doesn't give adequate directions for use or warnings about a use that's not mentioned on it. And if the labeling is false or misleading, then the product's misbranded. So in that way, the regulatory scheme and the First Amendment tests sort of merge. The FDA also says that the restrictions serve a substantial government interest in protecting patients from potentially unsafe or ineffective therapies. The industry says that the promotion is protected under the First Amendment as long as the statements are based on scientific evidence. So in the field of health science, what does it mean to be truthful and non-misleading? Suppose a company has one small study of a drug, we'll call it drug A, that shows some benefit for an unapproved use of relieving migraines. I get migraines, so I always use that as my example. And another larger study shows no benefit. So would the statement, a recent study showed that drug A helps to relieve migraines, be true? Yeah, that would be a true statement. But would it be misleading? I think yes again, because given the larger study showed no benefit, and the only reason you would be telling a physician that about the first study is to lead them to believe that there was a benefit. Suppose a study shows that a drug reduces cholesterol levels, but shows no effect on or even an increase in the incidence of cardiovascular events. In that case, the statement, drug A has been shown to reduce cholesterol levels in the blood, would be totally true. But because the relevance of the cholesterol level to a medical professional is its association with heart health, the statement would, I think, also be misleading, because the only reason to be sharing it is because the health professional would reasonably believe that statement to indicate a health benefit. So for each of the above statements, the industry says basically the statement's truthful and so it's protected, and the FDA can't properly block these statements. The danger here is not only the widespread promotion of drugs for uses that have never been objectively evaluated for safety and effectiveness, although that's a very serious danger. The industry's argument also, if accepted, it would grant a manufacturer the presumptive ability to market a drug for any use as soon as it receives FDA approval for a single use, as long as it has some study or phrases its language just so. And then it would put the burden on the FDA to show deception or that the product is unsafe or ineffective. Basically, we'd be back to 1906. Even further, because their argument posits that manufacturers have a constitutional right to market for unapproved uses as long as they can point to supportive evidence, even if the evidence is preliminary or inconclusive or conflicting, their argument actually leads to the more drastic position that unless selling a substance is unlawful, anyway, you know what that means. A manufacturer could market it, say market chocolate or plant food as a drug with no approval at all, as long as it could point to a study. So such outcomes would overturn the carefully constructed scheme that is premised on the notion that drugs should be on the market only if the objective expert has determined that it's safe and effective. this statement, my sort of more extreme examples, it's not an exaggeration. The FDA, in a brief last fall, when the company Amarin fought back in court against the agency's denial of approval for a supplemental use, the FDA said that a health benefit had not been shown and denied the application. The FDA wrote a frontal assault that the argument that the First Amendment argument the company was making was a frontal assault on the framework for new drug approval that Congress created in 1962, because allowing the manufacturer to promote such a use has the potential to eviscerate the FDA drug approval scheme. And the judge in response said, the short answer is that the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act's drug approval framework predates modern First Amendment law respecting commercial speech. In other words, the judge suggested that the First Amendment may preclude sensible regulation of drug marketing. So, as you can tell, in our view, history shows that after-the-fact enforcement is inadequate to protect patient safety. And when an unproven risk of safety and unproven assertion of safety and effectiveness is relied on, the resulting injury can be very severe, even as what was the case with the sulfanilamide, irreparable. And that's the risk posed by the agency's First Amendment theory. Oops, the industry's First Amendment theory. Thanks.